This time what I'm going to be showing you is the newest technique that Maya has available for rigging and binding your skin onto the mesh. And the first thing that I will need to talk about is that this is a new mesh. This is different than the other past videos. I didn't did a great job in cleaning it up, but at the same time I have everything onto a single mesh. This is what we know as a watertight mesh. There are no geometry inside of the basic shell, so if I could fill these with water at some point, there would be no leaks in any part of the model. So this is what we know as a watertight model. There are other things that I need to do in order to prep this model to make it a little bit more convenient for rigging purposes, and for that I'm gonna have to use a different kind of geometry to show you a better way of doing this bind. But in here, the only thing that I wanted to talk about are going to be the settings for the mesh. So this is the newest way that we worked in the game industry or movies. So I'm going to be showing you the skeleton. So this is my skeleton and my mesh, and I'm going to go to my skin, bind skin options. Over here, what I'm going to do is I will choose these settings. I have them available here, and the resolution, usually the higher the better, but as this is going to be a simple example, 512 is a good compromise between good and fast. Let me talk a little bit about this new way of binding the geometry, which is known as Geodesic Voxel. So in the past one, what I did was basically measure the distance between one vertex and all of the joints. Then Maya would choose the top number of max influences, in this case 3, the top 3 distances between the shorter distances between that vertex and the joints, and based on that, from the top 3 is going to be choosing which one is going to be the most representative, which is going to be the one that is going to be affecting the geometry the most. This is what we know as the normalized weights. Of course, the 3 influences added together are going to add up to 100% influences. The 3 influences are going to be then divided onto which one has a lower and a higher priority, so which one is going to be the one that is affecting it the most. In this particular case then, it is going to be taking a different approach. Instead of measuring by distances, what it's going to do is it's going to be taking it's going to be filling up this model with smaller cubes known as voxels, like the 3D version of a pixel. So it is going to be making the whole object out of pixels or voxels, and is going to say which ones are the vertices that are closest to the joints. So same concept, measuring by distance, but in this case it's going to be measuring by how many voxels there are going to be in between joints. And in this case, the nice advantage of the voxels is that they are not going to go outside of the distance or outside of the space. See, in a joint hierarchy, something like that, if my mesh was something like this, imagine the fingers going this way, the distance between these vertices, which are now living here, and this joint are going to be less than the distance that they may have to something like here. If this was a little bit more stretch, something like this, then the distance between these vertices that are in this position may be closer to this joint than to this joint, for instance. So in that case, what is going to happen is it's going to be measuring wrong, and it's just going to go outside of the geometry, even though the geometry wasn't really piercing out into this. If the distance was close, then that would be pretty weird. With these geodesic voxels, there's no way that that can happen, basically because it's as soon as it gets out of the model, it is not going to be creating any voxels out of that space. It is going to be a little bit more clear once I actually show you with a more precise example, like in the case of a humanoid, but I wanted to explain how these influences are going to be affecting these, as I'm going to be explaining some other things and issues that this geometry is going to have in a minute. So I'm going to hit bind skin. Actually, I have to select the joint and the mesh, and I'm going to hit bind skin, and I'm going to let Maya process this information for me. Now, in this case, when I select one of these joints and move it, you will notice that I have a lot of issues with my geometry, as some of these vertices may seem like they don't have enough influence and so forth. And that is basically the way that I created this geometry. At this point, I will need to go inside of my rigging menu and go to my paint, and I will need to say, well, select the joint that you want or you're caring about. So for instance, shoulder should have influence over all of these guys down here. So I'm going to paint up the value of 1, and I need to start painting in all of these things. So this joint is influencing 100% or a full value of 1 on these vertices over here. Remember what I said earlier. If a vertex is going to have 3 influences, let's say this vertex here is going to have 3 influences, the shortest one to them are going to be this one, and this one. Probably this one doesn't really have to have any influence whatsoever, the hand one, but as you can see, it is still giving me some influences over this area, and I'm assuming that was the case for these ones. So if I say value of 0 and I start painting it, you saw how it moved. The issue with painting with a value of 1 is that you don't have a good control over what is going to be redistributed to the other 2 joints. So for instance, floating to 1 in here guarantees that these vertex are going to be influenced by this joint 100%. Floating to 0 on this one, on the other hand, means that the weight is going to get distributed between this guy and this guy. And if I haven't painted the weights correctly, then removing this influence or moving this influence to 0 may actually be counterproductive. So usually when I float, I don't want to go all the way to 0. I don't want to just completely remove the influences, but I want to keep on adding on those influences. Now, this geometry has a really big issue, and I will show you what I mean in a future lesson, the next video. But let me show you what I'm trying to prove over here. So this arm joint should be influencing these vertices here. So if I say, let me just paint all of these influences to 100%, what's going to end up happening on my mesh is that it's going to deform in a really weird way. Do you see how I'm losing volume over here? My hand is going to have influences over these areas. So I'm going to paint them. And now I fixed that issue that I had before. Still painting these influences. Some cases it's a little bit complicated to paint in a single pose, so I will need to basically take this joint and turn it in a different orientation. So probably like that. And then select the mesh, click on my paint, and then paint these influences back to 1. Right. But again, I have this issue that I'm losing my volume in this area. And that happens because I don't have enough vertices to actually create what the human body does, the actual elbow. So as you can see in elbows, what you're gonna have is an extra layer of skin in here that can stretch in such a way that you can actually bend the arm. So this is something that we have to take in consideration whenever we're making these meshes. So even though the technique is better because it's going to not show me any geometry intersecting, it is going to be a little bit more complicated in the sense that I have to prep up for the geometry so it looks better whenever I'm bending it. So I'm going to stop this one now. This is going to be my save scene as part 5 end, and I'm going to show you a different configuration or a different mesh in the next video. So thanks for watching.